We've just seen getElementById is just one of the many ways we can access the DOM. And this used to be the only way you could access an element in the DOM. It's also a very intuitive and easy method because it only takes one argument. And of course it takes the ID of the element we want to access. And this makes it very useful, especially if you want to quickly access an element in the DOM. It's very performance efficient. It's very intuitive. What you may not know though is that this returns an element node. What? What is that? Don't worry, we're going to be going into this in a lot more detail in one of the upcoming sections. For now, just realize it returns an element node. How do we know that? Well, let me shoot to the screen. I'll show you now. How do we know that this getElementById returns an element node? How do we know that? Well, luckily for us, there's a whole lot of properties on every node that can tell us what type of node it is. And again, don't worry too much about this. This is kind of a teaser. We're going to have a whole section on nodes and what this all means. But if you are curious, this is how we'll know. So I've just picked up where we left off. This is exactly where we were before, where we created that header. And remember, we accessed the background property and we changed it to blue. The first starting point is to access our actual header node or our object. So let's access our header object. And within this object, within this node, we've got many default properties and methods. And one of them that will tell us the type of node this is, and very intuitively, node type. So if we go node type and we return it to the console, we get the number 1. But what is this number 1? Well, as it turns out, there are codes for what different node types mean. 1 just means it's an element node. And I'm going to be showing you this later, don't worry. Another way we can do it, which is perhaps even more intuitive, is instead of using node type, we can use node name. So instead of node type, we use node name. And we can see that the node name is a div element. Okay, back to the lecture. You might be thinking at this point that getElementById is sufficient. It's enough for us. But unfortunately, it also has its disadvantages. And there are two main disadvantages with using getElementById. The first disadvantage is that the ID has to be unique. So this means that if you've got two elements with the same ID and you want to get the second element, you can't by using getElementById. So that's a bit of a pain. The other disadvantage, and it kind of stems from the ID as well in a way, is that you can only ever access one element. So it just means if you wanted to add a particular function or change multiple elements at the same time, your code would have to be rewritten for each individual ID. What a pain, I think you would agree with me. But luckily for us, this is not the only method we can use. The DOM API provides us with others. Well, let's start looking at these in the next lecture.